call came at 11:02 on a Tuesday night in October, and I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the ceiling with my phone face up on the empty side of the bed, the way I do when I can't sleep, which is most nights now. The screen lit up with Maya's name, and my first thought, my immediate, reflexive, stupid first thought, was Derek. Something happened to Derek, because that is the machinery installed in me over 13 years of marriage. When something goes wrong, my first instinct is still to worry about him. Mom. Her voice was low, the way it gets when she's at his place and she thinks he can hear her through the walls. Mom, I found something. I sat up, not slowly either. I sat up the way you do when the word something carries a weight you've been waiting for without knowing you were waiting for it. What did you find, baby? I kept my voice even. I am very good at keeping my voice even. It is the one skill 13 years of marriage to Derek Okafor gave me that I actually use now. He has another phone. A pause. I could hear her breathing. In his desk. The bottom drawer. I was looking for a charger, Mom. I wasn't snooping. I need you to know that. I was just... Maya. I said it soft. I know. Tell me what you found. She was quiet for a moment, and I heard the rustling of her moving somewhere more private. A closet, maybe. I've heard that sound before when she calls me from his house and doesn't want him to know we're talking. 14 years old and already navigating his moods by sound and proximity. I hate that. I hate that I've handed that skill down to her like some kind of inheritance. There are pictures, she said, of a lady. And she's holding... Mom, there's a little kid. He's little, like baby little. And there are texts. I didn't read all of them, but the name in the phone is Rachel, and she keeps calling him babe. And she says... Her voice cracked, and that crack split something open in me that I'd been keeping sealed for 4 years. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. I didn't say a word. I let her breathe. She says, Jalen asked for you today. He keeps saying Dada. The ceiling in my new apartment has a water stain above the bed that I keep meaning to report to the landlord. I stared at it. I thought about how numbers always tell the truth eventually. I thought about the Raleigh hotel receipt I found in 2020. I thought about the therapist's office with its white noise machine outside the door, and how I sat across from a woman named Dr. Farouk, who had soft eyes and a kind voice, and I told her I thought my husband was hiding something, and she nodded slowly and said, Tell me about the anxiety you feel when you don't have information. I thought, I have been crazy for 4 years in the exact right direction. Mom, are you still there? I'm here, I said. I'm right here. I need you to take a breath, okay? And then I need you to put that phone back exactly where you found it. But, exactly. Where? You found it. I let that land. You didn't see anything? You went to sleep. Can you do that? She was quiet, and I could feel her processing. She got my brain, my daughter, the same one that needs to understand the why before it accepts the instruction. Are you going to do something about it? Yes. Do you promise? Maya. I said her name, the way my mother says mine when she means I have never lied to you and I'm not starting now. Go to sleep. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of that bed for a long time, not crying. I want to be clear about that because I know how these stories go, and this is not that part yet. I was doing what I do when a client's numbers stop making sense. I was making a list in my head. I was thinking about what I already had, what I needed, and what order I needed to get it in. But let me back up. Let me tell you how you end up at 11:02 on a Tuesday night with your 14-year-old whispering from her father's closet. because it doesn't happen all at once. That's the thing nobody tells you. It happens in such small increments that by the time you see the whole shape of it, you have been slowly hollowed out for years, and you don't even know what used to fill that space. Derek Okafor is the kind of man that other women tell you you're lucky to have. I mean that literally. I have been told, across the span of our marriage, by colleagues, by friends, by my own mother, that I am lucky. He's handsome, actually handsome, the kind where you understand why he walked into a room and rearranged it. He's funny. He remembers birthdays, not just yours, but the birthdays of your parents, your friends, their kids. He tips generously, always, in a way that's never performative. He is the kind of man who helps an elderly neighbor carry groceries and doesn't tell anyone about it, so you only find out because the neighbor tells you herself, unsolicited, with a hand on your arm. He is also the kind of man who, when you find something wrong, makes you feel like the wrongness is located inside you. The receipt was September 2020, a Tuesday, which should have already been a signal. He traveled for work, but always on Wednesdays and Thursdays. That was his rhythm. He'd been in medical equipment sales for 6 years, and his territory was South Carolina and coastal Georgia. The receipt was from a Hampton Inn in Raleigh, dated a Friday. One night, I found it in the breast pocket of a blazer I pulled from the dry cleaning pile because I was doing a favor. I held it for probably 90 seconds before I brought it to him. I want to say I was calm. I was not calm. I was the particular not calm of a woman who has been good at her job long enough to know what an anomaly looks like. And a Raleigh hotel receipt on a Friday for a man whose territory stops at the South Carolina state line is an anomaly. He didn't even hesitate. That's what I remember most. He looked at the receipt the way you look at a grocery list. Neutral, slightly bored, and he said, "Oh yeah, that was back in August. Marcus needed me to cover a client dinner. His mother had surgery." Marcus Plenard, his work friend. I knew Marcus. We'd been to his house for a 4th of July cookout. I liked his wife, Danielle. "I didn't know about that," I said. Derek looked up at me with an expression I would come to know very well. Not irritation, exactly. Concern. Gentle, patient concern, the kind a doctor uses when a patient is confused about their own symptoms. "Simone, I told you, the week before it happened. You were in the middle of tax season. I think you just had a lot on your plate." I stood there with that receipt in my hand. I had not forgotten. I am 48 years old now, and I was 34 then, and I had never in my life forgotten something my husband told me. I have a memory like a filing cabinet. My clients rely on it. But Derek said it with such perfect confidence that I spent the next 3 days secretly reviewing my own mental records, like an auditor going through disputed accounts, searching for the moment he told me and I'd let it slip. Then I ran into Danielle Plenard at the Harris Teeter on Providence Road. She asked how I was. I asked how Marcus's mother was recovering from surgery. She looked at me for just a half second too long before she said, "Oh, she's doing much better. Thanks for asking." But in that half second I saw something. A flicker, a recalibration, and I knew, the way you sometimes just know, that Marcus had told Danielle the story before I could ask. I went home and I told Derek I'd run into Danielle. I watched his face. He nodded, easy, poured himself a glass of water, said, "Good timing. I talked to Marcus last week. She had a rough few months." He had already briefed them. I understood that then, in the way you understand something, and then immediately doubt your own understanding because the alternative, the thing you're understanding, is so enormous that your mind protects you from it. I told my mother. That is the part that still costs me something to say out loud. I called my mother, Adeze Nwachukwu, who came to Charlotte from Lagos in 1981 and raised 3 children with a man who worked 12-hour shifts and never once complained about the hours, and I said, "Mama, I think Derek is hiding something from me." And she said, "Simone, that man drives 45 minutes in traffic to come to your father's birthday dinner every year. What is he hiding?" "I don't know, Mama. I just, you work too hard. You carry too much in your head. Derek is a good man, and you have a good life. You need to protect that. I need to protect that. As though a marriage is a house, and the woman's job is to keep the structure standing no matter what is happening to the foundation." My father, Emeka, said less. He said, "You don't throw away what is good because your head is busy." He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it to his plate, which is where my father delivers his most important verdicts. I have known since I was 8 years old that when Emeka Nwachukwu addresses the table, the conversation is over. So I filed it. I filed it the way I file documents I can't immediately classify. I labeled it pending, requires additional information, and I went back to work. The text was 2021. Not a year later, not much more. We were watching television, a Sunday, some evening crime show Derek liked, and his phone buzzed on the arm of the sofa, and I glanced at it the way you glance, automatic, not even conscious. The preview on the screen said, "Can't stop thinking about last week." The contact name was R. Thomas, MedTech Supply, a vendor he'd explained once in passing, a supply chain contact in the Raleigh territory. I said nothing in that moment. I said nothing for 3 days. I am an accountant. I know that you don't ask a question until you know at least something about the answer, because questions without context just give the other party time to construct their story. On the 4th day, I said, "I saw a text on your phone from R. Thomas. It said she couldn't stop thinking about last week." The concern was already in his face before I'd finished the sentence. "Simone." He said my name like a sigh. "Rachel Thomas is a vendor rep I've been working with on a contract renewal. Last week we were in back-to-back negotiations and it was a mess. She was probably talking about the deal." "Why is a vendor texting you on a Sunday night?" "Because that's how this industry works. We're not all on banker's hours." A pause. He sat down across from me and he put his hands together and he looked at me with that expression, the concerned one. And he said, "I'm starting to worry about you. This isn't the first time I think maybe we should talk to someone. Talk to someone. A therapist, just to have space. You've been stressed since the firm went through that restructuring, and I think—" He paused, seemed to choose his words carefully. "I think you have a pattern of anxiety that gets directed at me when you're overwhelmed, and I don't want to be the problem. But I also don't want to pretend I haven't noticed. I will tell you what happened next, because it is important. I went to therapy. I want you to sit with that. I, Simone Okafor, who had found a hotel receipt and a suspicious text and had two specific, concrete, articulable concerns about my husband's fidelity, I sat across from a therapist and allowed her to treat me for anxiety. Her name was Dr. Farouk, and she was good at her job. That's the painful part. She wasn't lazy or negligent. She was working with the information available to her, and the information available to her was a referral from a husband who had called ahead, who had been warm and concerned on the phone, who had said things like, "She's been under a lot of stress and I think she's developed some patterns of catastrophizing that are affecting our marriage." She worked with what she had, and what she had was Derek's narrative. We worked on something called cognitive diffusion, learning to observe my anxious thoughts without treating them as facts. Every time I felt that spike of alarm, the instinct that said something is wrong, I was instructed to notice it, name it, and let it pass without acting on it. I learned, in therapy, to distrust myself. I want to say that again because I need you to understand the precision of what happened to me. It wasn't that Derek yelled or threatened or hit. He did none of those things. What he did was cleaner and more thorough. He took the true thing inside me, the accurate alarm, the correct reading of the evidence, and he pathologized it so completely through so many channels that I enrolled in a process designed to silence it. He didn't shut me up. He got me to shut myself up. I did therapy for 7 months. I became calmer. I argued less. I stopped asking questions. Derek said I seemed more like myself. My mother said I seemed more settled. My father gave me a rare nod across the dinner table. I told myself maybe I'd been anxious, maybe I'd been catastrophizing. I had a good life, a good man, a daughter I loved, a career I'd worked for. I made partner track at 36. I had clients who called and asked specifically for me, not for the firm. They wanted Simone. Not because I was the fastest or the cheapest, but because I was the one who caught what other people missed. I was good at finding things that were hidden, and I had been trained methodically to stop looking. The separation happened not because I found evidence. The separation happened because something quiet in me finally broke, or maybe freed itself is the better word, broke free like a tooth worked loose over years. It was a small thing. We were at dinner, the three of us, and Maya had made a joke, something self-deprecating about her math grade. And I laughed, and Derek said, "Don't laugh, Simone. You'll encourage her." And Maya went quiet the way she goes quiet when she knows better than to push back. And I sat there with my fork in my hand and I thought, this is the rest of my life. This is the rest of my daughter's life. I called my cousin Yetunde the next day. I had never told Yetunde the full story. I hadn't told anyone the full story because Derek had been so thorough in building the narrative that to tell it was to sound paranoid. But I said, I think I need to leave. And Yetunde, who is a nurse in Atlanta and who has always said more with a silence than most people say with a speech, was quiet for a moment and then said, I'll come help you move. 4 months later, I was in a 2-bedroom apartment on the south side of Charlotte, with a water stain above the bed and my daughter's drawings pinned to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like little pineapples that she'd picked out herself when we furnished the kitchen. The divorce was not final. We had a custody arrangement, week on, week off, hammered out through lawyers who were polite and impersonal, and Derek, to his credit or his strategy, did not contest it vigorously. He was cooperative. He was, in the way of all men like him, exactly as charming to the attorney as he was to everyone else. The attorney told my lawyer he was very reasonable. Of course he was. Reasonable was the whole brand. And so we were. Separated for 4 months, divorce pending, Maya shuttling between 2 houses with a duffel bag that she packed and unpacked with the efficiency of a child who has been managing her parents' emotional temperatures since she was 9 years old. Until 11:02 on a Tuesday. I didn't sleep. When morning came, I was already at my desk, the real desk, the home office I'd built in the second bedroom, the one with the file cabinet and the second monitor and the accordion folders I use for complicated returns. I had been thinking all night, not panicking, thinking. The difference between those two things is one that took me years to learn about myself. Panic is loud and useless. Thinking is quiet and builds something. I knew several things with certainty. Derek had a parallel relationship with a woman named Rachel in Raleigh. The relationship had been ongoing for at least 4 years, which meant it had started when we were married, before I'd found the hotel receipt, before the texts, before all of it. There was a child, a boy, named Jalen, approximately 2 years old based on what Maya had described, which placed his birth in 2023. Derek had been living, with considerable skill, 2 lives at a distance of 2.5 hours. And then I thought about something specific because I am a tax accountant, and this is how my brain works. Derek filed his taxes. Derek filed them as married, filing separately, per our arrangement during the separation, but for the years we were together, he'd always filed jointly, except, and this was the thing I'd processed in a low, half-buried way for 2 years without ever surfacing it. Derek's travel receipts were always to one of 3 cities. Charlotte, obviously, Columbia, South Carolina, and Raleigh. I thought about the head of household deduction. I pulled out my laptop. The head of household filing status is one that gets misused constantly. It's in the top 10 issues the IRS trains agents to scrutinize. To claim it, you need to be unmarried. You need to have paid more than half the cost of keeping up a home. And you need to have a qualifying dependent living with you for more than half the year. The standard deduction for head of household in 2023 was $20,800 versus $13,850 for single. Meaningful difference. The kind of difference that a man supporting a second household might find attractive. I had done our joint returns. I always had. Derek made more, but I was the accountant, so the paperwork lived with me. But Derek also filed business expense reports through his company. Those I'd never had reason to look at closely. The question I was asking myself was, did Derek file anything in North Carolina that would suggest a second residence? A separate filing? A dependent he'd claimed that wasn't on our joint return? I thought about Rachel. I thought, she doesn't know either. That came to me slowly, the way the true things do. The text from the hotel receipt. A man who had a client contact named R. Thomas in the Raleigh territory. A woman who was texting him on Sunday night with that particular tone. Can't stop thinking about last week. Not desperate, not sneaking around, just natural. Like a woman who thinks she is in a normal relationship. A woman who believed something specific, that Derek was finalizing his divorce. I knew the story he was telling her. I knew it because I knew him. He would have told her, my marriage has been over for years. We're separated. I'm working through the legal process. She's difficult. It's taking longer than it should. He would have been patient about it. He would have been kind. He would have bought her flowers not on special occasions, which are obligatory and therefore meaningless, but randomly on a Tuesday, because random is more convincing than scheduled. He would have remembered things about her that she'd mentioned in passing. Her mother's name. The restaurant where they had their first date. He was very good at being loved by people. That was his whole thing. I texted my lawyer, not called, texted because I needed a record, and said, I need to talk about financials. There may be additional assets I wasn't aware of. Can we schedule time today or tomorrow? Then I did something I had not done in 4 years of questions and receipts and therapy and being told I was anxious. I searched Rachel Thomas, Raleigh, North Carolina. She wasn't hard to find. Public social media presence, modest and normal. A LinkedIn profile, healthcare administration coordinator at a medical network in Raleigh, 34 years old. A Facebook page she clearly didn't use much, mostly shares of her son's photos. A little boy with Derek's jaw in his eyes, wearing a shirt with a cartoon dinosaur, laughing at something off camera with the pure physical joy of a 2-year-old who doesn't know anything yet. His name was Jalen. He had his father's smile. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called her. I want to tell this part carefully because it matters. I have thought about it many times since, the way it played out, the specific register of it. And what I feel about Rachel Thomas is not simple, and I'm not going to pretend it is. What I felt at the beginning, in the hours before I called, was the particular anger of a woman whose suspicions have been confirmed and whose confirmation is a child, a whole human child, a boy who calls Derek Dada and doesn't know that his father has another family 2.5 hours away. But by the time I called, the anger had done what anger does for me. It burned off into purpose. I I called Rachel Thomas at 9:17 in the morning on a Wednesday from my apartment, sitting at my real desk with a legal pad in front of me and a pen in my hand. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was careful. She didn't know my number. I said, "Rachel, my name is Simone Okafor. I'm Derek's wife, not his ex-wife, his wife. We are separated, but our divorce is not finalized. I'm not calling to argue with you or threaten you. I'm calling because I think you may have information that I need, and I think you may have been lied to in ways that affect your son." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, very quietly, "He told me the divorce was almost done." "I know," I said. "He told me by January." "I know." I kept my voice flat. Flat, but not cold. There's a difference. "Rachel, I want to ask you a few things, and I need you to know that I am not recording this, and I have no interest in using anything you say against you. I need specific information. You don't have to answer, but I think it would be useful to both of us." Another silence, and then something in her breathing shifted, and she said, "He told me she—" She stopped. I heard her correct herself, recalibrate. "He told me you had mental health issues, that you were paranoid, that you'd been difficult throughout the marriage." There it was, said plainly, without cruelty, just the fact of it. The story he'd installed in her about me was the same one he'd installed in the therapist, the same one he'd floated to my parents, the same one that had lived inside my own head for 4 years like a slow leak. I imagine that made his explanations for why the divorce was taking so long feel very plausible, I said. "Yes." Her voice was barely above a murmur. "How long have you been together?" A pause. 4 years in February? 4 years in February. The hotel receipt was September 2020. 4 years, 2 months. I did the math without meaning to because I always do the math, and what it told me was that he had been with her before I found the first receipt, and long before I'd been sent to therapy to learn to silence the alarm. "Does he help support Jalen financially?" "He gives me cash. Not... There's no arrangement. It's just cash, whenever..." She stopped. I heard her understanding something, the shape of it arriving to her the same way it had arrived to me in increments, each piece fitting against the last. "Rachel," I said, and I held the legal pad steady because my hand had started to shake and I did not want to hear it in my voice. "When did you last speak with a family attorney?" "I haven't. You need to." I wrote down the name of a family law attorney in Raleigh that I had already looked up before I called. I read her the name and number. "I want you to know that what Derek has done, the financial arrangement with Jalen, the way this has been structured, there are legal implications for you that are separate from what's happening in my divorce. You have rights. Jalen has rights." She was quiet for a long time, and then she said something I had not expected, said it in a voice that was tired and small and honest. "I really loved him." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. "I know you did. Because that is the thing about men like Derek. It is not a performance for them. Not entirely. He genuinely had warmth. He genuinely made people feel seen. What he lacked was not the capacity to love, but the capacity to choose a life and live inside it honestly. He needed to be, at all times, the most important person in every room. The person everyone loved best, and no one room was ever enough for that. Rachel and I spoke for 22 minutes. By the end, her voice had steadied, and mine had steadied, and we had established, without drama, without ceremony, a set of facts that neither of us had fully possessed before the call. After I hung up, I sat very still for a while. Then I called my accountant colleague at the firm. Marcus isn't here, but there are others. A woman named Priya. who is the only other person who knows where every body is buried in a complicated return, and I said, Priya, hypothetically speaking, if someone were filing head of household status at 2 different addresses with a dependent at each, what would be the most efficient way to document that? Priya was quiet for a second. Then, hypothetically? Entirely hypothetical. You'd want the actual returns, she said. Both years in question, ideally the supporting schedules. If there's a dependent claimed improperly, like a child on a return when the parent isn't the custodial or legal guardian, that's a Schedule 8812 issue, potentially a fraudulent dependency exemption. If someone claimed head of household status while legally married, that's a filing status violation, potentially both. The IRS takes that seriously. How seriously? Civil penalty seriously, potentially more, depending on the pattern and the amounts. I thanked her. I wrote down everything she said in shorthand that only I can read, the same shorthand I've used since graduate school. The same shorthand I use when I'm sitting across from a client who's telling me a story that doesn't match their documents. I have a folder for every client. I have files going back 7 years. I know where everything is. Always. Organization is not a skill I developed. It is a feature of my brain. The same way colorblindness is a feature, something I didn't choose, but also don't have to work at. I started a new folder for this. I labeled it Okafor D. Pending. Over the next 3 days, I gathered the following: our joint tax returns from 2019 through 2022, Derek's company W-2s, which I had copies of from our joint filings, a record of 2 addresses associated with Derek's name, his Charlotte address, which was the marital home, and a Raleigh address I found through a public property tax database maintained by Wake County, searchable online, which I cross-referenced with the years Rachel had confirmed their relationship is ongoing. The Wake County records showed a property in Derek's name, purchased in 2021, in a neighborhood in East Raleigh. A 2-bedroom house, property taxes paid annually, owner-occupied designation. Owner-occupied. He had bought her a house. I did not explode. I want you to understand that. I made a note in the folder. I printed the Wake County property record. I put it in a tab labeled property/real estate. And then I kept going. A man who owns a house in Raleigh while living with his wife in Charlotte cannot claim both as primary residences. A man who lists a child at the Raleigh address as a qualifying dependent, even informally, even on a state-level document, even in a way that could slip past a cursory review, has created a paper trail. And paper trails are my entire professional life. I found 3 things in the tax records that needed a conversation with my attorney. I will not go into the specific mechanics of all 3 because this is not a tax seminar. But the summary is this. Derek had, across 3 tax years, made filing choices that were inconsistent with his actual residential and family status. Some of those choices had benefited him. Some had left behind the kind of documentation that, when assembled together and presented to someone who knows what they're looking at, tells a very clear story. I built the folder carefully. Each tab, each document, organized chronologically by tax year on one side, by category on the other. I printed everything on clean paper, not photocopied smudges, but crisp, legible documents. I used blue ink for my own annotations. My handwriting is small and precise. My attorney reviewed the folder on a Thursday morning and was quiet for a long time. Simone, she said finally. This is thorough. I'm an accountant, I said. This goes beyond the divorce. She laid one document out flat on her desk, then another beside it. This is a conversation for a forensic accountant and possibly for the IRS. I know. She looked at me. Are you okay? It was the first time anyone had asked me that with genuine curiosity, rather than with the subtext of, "Are you going to behave?" I thought about the answer for a second. "I will be," I said, "but I need to do one more thing first." She waited. "I need my parents to know the truth. Not the version he told them, not the version I told them. The small, careful version where I protected him without meaning to. The actual truth." "Why?" I thought about it. I thought about my father at his dinner table, delivering his verdict about a marriage he didn't understand. I thought about my mother telling me I needed to protect what was good. I thought about being 16 years old and sitting at that same table and watching my father tell my mother that she was wrong about something. I can't even remember what. And watching her go quiet, fold herself inward, adjust. I thought about learning that model. I thought about how we teach our daughters what women are for, not in speeches, but in silences. "Because I told them something was wrong," I said, "for years, and they told me to try harder, and I need them to see why that was. Not cruel, maybe, but what it cost me. I need to be believed by the people who should have believed me first." The dinner was my mother's idea. She'd been calling more since the separation, the way she does when she's worried and can't say so directly. Just calls to check on small things. Did I need her bobo recipe because Maya had mentioned it? Did I have enough towels in the new apartment? Was I eating properly? My mother's love language is logistics. She called on a Friday and asked if I'd come to dinner Sunday, and I said yes. And then I said, "Can you also invite Derek?" A pause. "Simone, Mama, I need to have a conversation. I need everyone there." Another pause. "Your father will want to know. Tell him I have information to share." I kept my voice level, even. The machinery of me that 13 years of marriage had installed, finally put to a use I chose. I arrived at my parents' house at 5:30 with the folder under my arm. Their house in Steel Creek is the same house they moved into in 1995. My mother keeps it immaculate in the way that people who were not always safe keep things, like neatness is its own kind of control against chaos. The kitchen always smells like palm oil and something slow cooked. My father's chair in the living room has an indentation shaped exactly like him, and the TV remote lies on the same spot on the arm of that chair it has lived on since I was 11 years old. Derek was already there when I arrived. Of course he was. He was in the living room with my father, watching something sports adjacent on the television, and he stood when I came in and said, "Simone," in the warm, easy way he has. The same warm, easy way he has with everyone, the way that costs him nothing and purchases everything. And he kissed my cheek and I let him, because the performance had a few more minutes to run and I knew my cue. We sat at the table. My mother had made a goosey soup, my favorite. She does that when she's worried about me. Makes my favorite things. It's the same algorithm she's run since I was a child with a fever. I ate a little. I talked a little. Derek talked about Maya, about her soccer team, about a funny thing she'd said at breakfast on Sunday. He's wonderful at this, at the surface of a family dinner, at the warm, circulating ease of it. My parents were relaxed. My mother laughed twice. My father asked Derek about the sales numbers for his quarter, and Derek answered in the fluent, numbers comfortable way of a good salesman who knows his stuff. I let it run. Then, when my mother stood to clear the first round of plates, I said, "Mama, sit down. I need to show you something." She looked at me. My father looked at me. Derek looked at me and I saw it, clearly for the first time without the fog of self-doubt, a flicker of something. Not guilt, calculation. The brief recalibration of a man who has seen the folder under my arm and is already assembling his response. I placed the folder on the table in front of my parents. Not in front of Derek. I want to be clear about that. I placed it in front of them. Because this was not about confronting Derek. I had done what I needed to do with Derek through my attorney, through channels, on record. This was about something different. This was about my mother's hands in her lap and my father's face, the face that had looked at his plate when I told him something was wrong and delivered the verdict downward. I need you to see this, I said, because every time I told you something was wrong, you told me to try harder. My mother opened the folder. My father leaned in. I watched their faces. I had organized it for this moment with the same care I'd use for a client presentation. Not overwhelming. I'd removed the most technical tax documents, kept the personal ones, the ones that told the story in human terms. The Wake County property record. A printed and annotated timeline. Photographs I'd taken from public social media of Jalen. Not to harm Rachel. She had consented to my use of them when I'd called her back to explain what I planned to do and ask her permission. But because my parents needed to see that this was a child. A 2-year-old child. A real person who had been created in the years when I was being sent to therapy for my anxiety. A person who called Derek Dada in a house Derek had purchased in Raleigh, while my mother told me I was lucky. My mother's hand went to her mouth. My father was still. The specific stillness of him. I know it as well as I know anything. It is the stillness that precedes something that he will not be able to take back. Derek stood. He stood without drama, without raising his voice. I will give him that, whatever it's worth. He said, "Simone." Just my name. Like a question that he already knew didn't have an answer. He looked at me for a moment with that face. Not the concerned one, not the warm one, something I hadn't seen before, something stripped of its packaging. Then he went to the coat rack in the hallway. I heard the front door open and close. He didn't say goodbye to my parents. He didn't attempt to refute anything. There was nothing to refute. The folder was the folder. My mother was crying, softly, in the way she cries, contained, turned inward, her shoulders drawn together. My father said nothing. That was the part I had not let myself think about too carefully beforehand. The silence from my father. He sat at that table and he looked at the Wake County property record, and he looked at the little boy in the photograph. Derek's jaw, Derek's eyes, Derek's smile on a 2-year-old's face in a dinosaur shirt. And he said nothing. He put his hands flat on the table on either side of the folder, and he looked at them, and I watched his face, and I thought, this is him understanding what his silence cost his daughter. I did not say that. I let him be inside it. I had not come for an apology from my father. Or rather, I had come for something more than an apology, something an apology can't reach. I had come for him to know. Just to know. With the evidence in front of him, what the knowing felt like when it arrived too late. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. She held it the way she held it when I was a child and sick. She didn't say anything either, and I was glad, because I didn't want the things she might have been tempted to say. The apology that tries to close the account too quickly, to return us to a surface. I let her hold my hand. I looked at my father. He was still looking at the table. I stayed for another 40 minutes, not because I had more to say, but because I did not want to leave the way Derek had, without ceremony, without acknowledging that the people in the room were real and the moment was real. I helped my mother clear the dishes. She kept her hand on my shoulder blade for longer than necessary when she reached past me to put a pot in the drying rack, and I felt that pressure and I stored it somewhere. My father walked me to my car. He stood with his hands in his pockets and he said, and this is exactly what he said because I have replayed it more times than I can count. I was wrong to tell you to try harder. He said it to the driveway. Not to me, exactly, to the driveway, the way he says his important things. I know you know that, I said. He nodded. We didn't hug. That is not our language, my father and I. He stood in the driveway with his hands in his pockets until I pulled out, and in my rearview mirror I could see him standing there in the yellow light from the front porch, getting smaller, a man working through something alone the way he has always worked through things. I drove home. Charlotte at night is its own particular thing. The lights of the skyline visible from the highway. The city spread out with a kind of quiet confidence, not Chicago, not New York, but a real city that knows what it is. I've lived here my whole life except for graduate school, and there are parts of it that know me back. The road from my parents' house to my apartment takes me past the church where Maya was baptized, past the Harris Teeter, where I ran into Danielle Plenard, past the street where Yatunde and I used to get fries at a place that isn't there anymore. I was not crying. I want to be precise about that because I have cried in my car many times over the last 4 years. Great, exhausted, private crying, the kind you do when you've been carrying something too long and the car is the only place where no one can see you and require something of you. I had earned those cries, every one of them, and I don't take them back. But on this night I was not crying. I was driving in a particular silence, the kind that comes after a thing is finished. My phone rang through the Bluetooth, Maya's name on the dashboard screen. I accepted it. Hey, baby. Hey. Her voice was careful in the way of a teenager who has been waiting. How did it go? I thought about how to answer that for a moment. It went the way it needed to go. Is Dad... She stopped. What is he going to say? I don't know. Honest. I think for a while he's going to say whatever he needs to say. That's been his pattern. Mom? 14. And she already knew the shape of him. She had always known. Kids always know, I think. They just don't have language for it. Are you okay? It's a question that has been asked of me too many times over too many years with the wrong kind of subtext. Are you okay? Meaning, are you going to make trouble? Are you okay? Meaning, are you going to embarrass us? Are you okay? Meaning, are you going to keep seeing problems that aren't there? My daughter asked it, and she meant only what it said. I thought about the folder, about the Wake County property record, about the phone call with Rachel and the silence of my father and the way my mother's hand felt on my shoulder blade. I thought about Dr. Farouk teaching me to let my own true knowing pass without acting on it, like a cloud, like weather, like a symptom of something wrong with me rather than data. I thought about 4 years of being methodical and accurate and exactly right about every single thing. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm right, and I've always been right. Maya was quiet for a second. I could hear her working through that, the way she works through things. She has my brain, my daughter, the filing cabinet, the memory like a document archive. She said softly, Yeah, you have been. Outside, Charlotte kept doing what it does. Lights, roads, the city going on. The apartment was 15 minutes away. It has a water stain on the ceiling that I keep meaning to report, and pineapple magnets on the fridge, and a file cabinet in the second bedroom next to the window. It's not the house I expected to be in at 38. It doesn't have the backyard where Maya and I grew tomatoes for 2 summers in a row, or the kitchen with the island that I chose every cabinet handle for, or the bedroom where I lay for years under the correct ceiling, staring at it and understanding the truth of my own life in increments. What it has is mine. Every piece of furniture in it I chose without consulting anyone. Every drawer is organized by a logic that belongs only to me. The coffee mug on the counter is there because I put it there, and it will be there tomorrow because I live alone and no one moves my things, and that is a small and ordinary and almost embarrassing thing to value. The location of your own coffee mug. Except that I value it the way you value something you went without for long enough to understand its weight. The folder was in my bag on the passenger seat. I thought about where I would file it when I got home. Not pending anymore. It was resolved, or resolving, in the methodical way that things resolve when you do the work correctly. Not with an explosion, not with a confrontation in the street, but with tabs and documents and accurate information presented to the people who needed to see it. My attorney would handle the rest. The IRS information was in other hands. Rachel had the name of the family attorney in Raleigh. I had done what I was good at. There is a grief in being right too long too alone, and I won't pretend there isn't. The grief is not for Derek. I want to be precise about that too, because women are always expected to grieve for the lost marriage, the lost man, and that grief is real for some people, and I don't dismiss it. But what I grieve is the years of myself, the years I spent learning to distrust my own knowing. The version of me who sat in Dr. Farouk's office and worked on letting go of accurate perceptions because the man in my house had more institutional credibility than the woman looking back at me from the mirror. The years I spent being meticulous, methodical, exactly correct, and being told by my husband, my parents, the systems I trusted, that the problem was my perception. That grief is a specific kind. It sits behind the sternum. It doesn't resolve into crying easily. It's more like a weight that you learn to carry, and then at some point you realize you're carrying it, and you think, oh, so that's what this has been. But I was driving home, and Maya had heard me when I said I was right, said, yeah, you have been. The city was going by, and the folder was on the passenger seat, and the water stain above my bed was waiting, and the coffee mug was on the counter. I was 38 years old. I was a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte, where clients called and asked for me specifically, and not the firm. I had a daughter who packed her duffel bag every week with the efficiency of someone managing grown-up things, and who called me at 11:02 at night when she found something, and who trusted me to tell her what to do with it. I'd been right about everything. I had always been right. The apartment complex came into view, the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, and I turned in and found my spot, the one I always take, second from the end, close to the stairs. And I sat for a moment with the engine off and my hands in my lap. Then I picked up the folder, tucked it under my arm, and went inside, and